My healing gift awakened the Alpha King's cursed wolf. It recognized me as his gifted mate before he ever could. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, we would like to ask for one small favor. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. It only takes a moment, it costs nothing, and your support helps us continue creating heartfelt, emotional, and unforgettable stories for you. We truly appreciate every one of you. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. We always enjoy seeing how these stories connect people from different countries and cultures. Now let us begin today's story. Some destinies do not begin with a heartbeat. They begin with a voice that only one soul is meant to hear. Every kingdom carried stories that people whispered only after sunset, but none inspired more fear than the legend of the White Wolf King, whose own wolf had fallen silent beneath an ancient curse. For nearly a decade, King Alpha Lucian Ashford ruled with unwavering strength, sharp judgment, and unmatched discipline, yet behind his calm silver eyes lived an emptiness that no victory, no celebration, and no royal honor could ever fill. The elders claimed the curse had stolen the bond between man and wolf forever. The royal healers insisted there was no remedy. The priests declared it was the price of an old promise that had been broken long before Lucian was born. Eventually, the kingdom stopped searching for hope. They simply learned to live with a king whose greatest strength remained asleep. Hundreds of miles away, far beyond the towering castle walls, Isla Bennett quietly spent her mornings gathering herbs beneath the warm light of the rising sun. She was only 25 years old, a white omega whose healing gift had earned gratitude from countless villages but little recognition from powerful people. She believed true healing began long before medicine touched a wound. It began when someone finally felt seen, heard, and safe. That simple belief had followed her through every road she had walked, every stranger she had comforted, and every family she had helped rebuild after hardship. She never imagined it would one day lead her to the heart of an ancient kingdom. One quiet afternoon, a royal messenger arrived outside her small cottage carrying a sealed letter marked with the crest of House Ashford. The invitation was brief yet impossible to ignore. The Alpha King himself requested the presence of a healer, whose methods could not be explained by ordinary magic. No promises were made. No details were offered. Only a single sentence remained etched across the parchment. Come if you believe even silent hearts deserve another chance. Isla stared at the words for a long time before carefully folding the letter and placing it inside her travel bag. Something deep inside her whispered that this journey would change more than one life. The castle stood like a mountain above the surrounding forests, beautiful yet strangely quiet. Servants moved through the grand halls with respectful efficiency, but every smile seemed restrained by an invisible weight. Portraits of former rulers lined the corridors while statues of magnificent wolves watched silently from every corner. Isla sensed grief lingering beneath the polished marble and elegant architecture, as though the castle itself remembered a happier time. She was escorted through towering doors into a spacious chamber where Lucian Ashford stood alone beside an open window overlooking the kingdom he had sworn to protect. He appeared exactly as the stories described, tall, composed, powerful, with silver eyes that reflected both authority and endless exhaustion. Their eyes met only briefly before the king thanked her for accepting his invitation. His voice carried dignity without arrogance, yet Isla immediately recognized something no physician had ever written in a report. He was not merely carrying a curse. He had grown accustomed to believing he deserved it. She stepped closer with quiet respect and asked only one question. May I? Lucian gave a small nod. Isla gently placed her fingertips against his wrist, allowing her healing magic to flow with careful restraint instead of force. For one suspended heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the air throughout the chamber shifted. Every candle flickered. Every window trembled softly. A warm current unlike ordinary magic swept through the room as an overwhelming presence awakened beneath Lucian's calm exterior. Isla's breath caught when she heard a deep, steady voice that no one else appeared to notice. It did not speak with fear or confusion. It spoke with unmistakable certainty. Gifted mate. Her eyes widened as she slowly lifted her gaze toward Lucian, who remained perfectly still, unaware that the cursed wolf sleeping inside him had finally opened its eyes and had already recognized the woman standing before him long before the king ever could. The silence that followed lingered far longer than the strange whisper itself. Isla slowly withdrew her hand, her heartbeat steady even as countless questions raced through her mind. She had treated people whose injuries could not be seen and comforted souls carrying invisible burdens, but never before had she heard the voice of another person's wolf. Lucian studied her expression with quiet curiosity. He had felt something awaken inside him during the brief touch, a warmth unlike anything he had experienced since the curse had first taken hold, yet the sensation disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. "Did you discover anything?" he asked calmly. Isla hesitated. She knew the truth would only confuse him because his own eyes revealed complete uncertainty. The voice had spoken only to her. "I discovered that your magic is not gone," she answered honestly. "It is simply waiting for something it has not found in a very long time." Lucian lowered his gaze toward the window overlooking the kingdom. Those words stirred a fragile hope he had trained himself never to expect. Before either of them could continue, several royal advisors entered the chamber with measured steps. They had witnessed the unexplained tremor that had passed through the castle moments earlier. Their cautious expressions quickly shifted toward suspicion when they learned it had happened the instant Isla placed her hand upon the king. Throughout the afternoon, whispers traveled through every hallway. Some servants quietly celebrated, believing the ancient curse had finally begun to weaken. Others feared the opposite, wondering whether an unfamiliar healer had disturbed forces that should have remained asleep forever. By sunset, the royal council requested an immediate audience with Lucian. Isla remained outside the council chamber while the elders questioned the king for hours. They reminded him that countless healers had failed before her. They warned him that unusual magic often demanded an unexpected price. A few even suggested sending Isla away before the mysterious awakening grew stronger. Lucian listened patiently to every concern, yet one detail refused to leave his thoughts. For the first time in nearly 10 years, he had felt his heartbeat respond to something beyond duty. It was only a brief moment, but it was real. When the meeting finally ended, he surprised everyone by making a simple announcement. Isla Bennett would remain at the castle as his official healing advisor until they understood what had happened. No one openly challenged his decision, although many exchanged uncertain glances as they left the chamber. Later that evening, Isla wandered through the peaceful castle gardens beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars. The scent of lavender drifted through the cool air, while a gentle breeze carried the distant sound of flowing water from an old stone fountain. She knelt beside a bed of white flowers, allowing her fingers to brush their delicate petals, as she quietly reflected on the impossible voice she had heard. Suddenly, the same deep presence echoed inside her mind once more, softer this time yet unmistakably clear. "You returned." Isla looked around instinctively, but no one stood nearby. The words did not come from the night. They came from the wolf sleeping within Lucian. "Why can I hear you?" she whispered beneath her breath. A peaceful warmth surrounded her instead of fear. "Because you heal what others cannot see." Before she could ask another question, the presence faded once again, leaving only the gentle rustling of leaves beneath the moonlight. The following morning, Lucian joined Isla in the gardens before sunrise. He admitted he had slept peacefully for the first time in years. The endless pressure inside his chest had grown strangely lighter after their meeting. Isla smiled gently but remained thoughtful. She now understood that healing the king would require far more than restoring his forgotten wolf. Somewhere beneath the ancient curse rested years of loneliness, guilt, and silent resignation, and until those unseen wounds were acknowledged, no amount of magic alone would ever be enough to set either the man or the wolf completely free. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm, unlike anything the castle had experienced in years. Instead of filling Lucian's schedule with endless examinations and failed rituals, Isla asked for something that surprised everyone. She requested permission to walk with the king through the palace gardens every morning before the royal court assembled. The advisors questioned how a simple walk could possibly weaken an ancient curse, but Isla never argued. She simply smiled and continued her work. On the first morning, neither of them spoke very much. Dew rested upon the grass while the first rays of sunlight painted the ancient stone walls with a soft golden glow. Lucian had spent years believing every meeting needed a purpose, every conversation required a solution, and every decision carried the weight of an entire kingdom. Isla quietly noticed the constant tension hidden beneath his calm expression. Rather than asking about the curse, she pointed toward a small robin building its nest in the branches above them. "It returns every spring," she said. "Not because it knows tomorrow will be perfect, but because it trusts there will be another morning." Lucian followed the tiny bird with his eyes before allowing the faintest smile to appear. It was so brief that he almost convinced himself it had never happened. Each day brought another simple lesson disguised as an ordinary moment. They visited the royal greenhouse, where Isla patiently cared for herbs that palace gardeners had nearly abandoned. She explained that plants did not grow faster because someone demanded it. They flourished when given the right balance of light, water, and time. One afternoon, they helped an elderly groundskeeper replant a young oak tree that had been bent by a recent storm. Lucian instinctively attempted to straighten the trunk with force until Isla gently stopped him. "Roots become stronger when they are supported, not forced," she said softly. Those words lingered in his thoughts long after the work was finished. Slowly, the atmosphere throughout the castle began to change. Servants noticed the king greeting people by name instead of simply nodding in passing. Palace staff laughed more freely during their daily routines. Even the royal hounds that had always kept their distance now calmly rested near Lucian whenever he sat outside with Isla. None of these changes could be measured by ancient scrolls or magical instruments, yet everyone felt them. Late one evening, while Lucian stood alone in the library reviewing old records about the curse, the familiar warmth stirred inside him once again. This time it remained. He closed his eyes, breathing carefully as an unfamiliar voice echoed faintly within his thoughts. It carried quiet strength instead of anger. "She heals more than wounds." Lucian's eyes opened immediately. The words vanished before he could answer, but they left behind an undeniable certainty. For the first time since the curse had begun, he had heard something beyond silence. Meanwhile, Isla discovered another forgotten section of the castle, hidden beneath the oldest wing of the palace. Shelves filled with weathered journals and faded maps surrounded a single stone table covered in dust. At its center rested a journal written by a healer who had served the royal family generations earlier. As Isla carefully turned the fragile pages, one sentence immediately captured her attention. It read, "No curse survives forever when a guarded heart willingly remembers how to trust." She gently closed the journal and looked toward the distant castle windows where Lucian's chamber overlooked the kingdom. She finally understood that every conversation, every quiet morning, and every ordinary act of kindness had never been separate from the healing. They had been the healing all along. Somewhere deep within Lucian, the sleeping wolf had already begun finding its way home, not because powerful magic had forced it awake, but because someone had patiently reminded the lonely man carrying it that hope was still worthy of being believed. The forgotten journal remained on Isla's mind long after she returned it to the ancient stone table. The sentence she had discovered echoed through her thoughts with quiet certainty. No curse survives forever when a guarded heart willingly remembers how to trust. It did not sound like a legend or a hopeful guess. It sounded like the observation of someone who had witnessed the impossible become reality. The following morning, Isla invited Lucian to accompany her beneath the oldest wing of the castle. Curious but unhurried, he followed her through winding corridors lined with faded tapestries until they reached the hidden archive. Dust floated through thin rays of sunlight that slipped between narrow windows, giving the forgotten chamber an almost timeless stillness. Isla carefully placed the journal before him and opened it to the marked page. Lucian read every word in silence. His expression remained composed, but his silver eyes lingered on the final sentence much longer than the others. "I have spent years believing the curse was my enemy," he admitted quietly. "Perhaps I never stopped to ask why it appeared in the first place." Isla looked toward the shelves filled with histories that few people remembered. "Sometimes pain survives because it is protecting a wound that never truly healed," she answered. "If someone believes trusting others will only lead to more loss, the heart begins building walls that even hope cannot climb." Those words settled gently between them. Lucian realized he had mastered every royal duty except one. He had never allowed himself to grieve the years the curse had taken from him. Instead, he buried every disappointment beneath responsibility, convincing himself that a king should carry burdens without ever speaking of them. That afternoon, rather than returning immediately to the royal court, Lucian asked Isla to walk with him through the village beyond the castle gates. It had been many months since he had visited without an official ceremony. The townspeople greeted him with respect, but this time he did not hurry past them. He stopped to listen to an elderly baker proudly describe her grandson's first day helping inside the family shop. He accepted a small bouquet of wildflowers from a smiling little girl who insisted every leader deserved something beautiful in the middle of a busy day. He thanked a carpenter for restoring a weathered bridge that connected neighboring farms before winter arrived. None of those moments changed the kingdom through laws or decrees, yet something within Lucian quietly shifted with every sincere conversation. Isla watched from a respectful distance, recognizing that genuine healing often happened when people rediscovered the simple connections they had forgotten to value. As evening approached, they rested beside a peaceful lake where the water reflected the orange glow of the setting sun. Lucian admitted that he had always feared becoming a burden to the people who depended on him. He believed showing uncertainty would weaken the crown. Isla smiled gently and skipped a smooth stone across the calm surface. "Strength is not pretending that nothing hurts," she said. "Real strength is allowing kindness to reach the places that fear has guarded for too long." The lake became still again. Without warning, the familiar warmth spread through Lucian's chest, stronger than ever before. This time the voice of his wolf did not sound distant. It carried quiet pride. "You are remembering." Lucian closed his eyes as peace settled over him instead of confusion. When he opened them again, Isla noticed that the constant weight she had seen behind his silver eyes had softened. The curse had not disappeared, but for the first time it no longer seemed like an unbreakable prison. It had become a door that was slowly beginning to open from the inside, one honest choice at a time. As hope quietly returned to the castle, not everyone welcomed the change. The royal council had spent years accepting the curse as an unchangeable part of the kingdom, and the sudden improvement in the king's spirit unsettled those who had built their influence around certainty rather than possibility. At the next council gathering, several noble families politely questioned Isla's continued presence within the palace. They insisted their concerns centered on tradition and caution, yet beneath their carefully chosen words rested an uncomfortable truth. An unknown healer from a distant village had accomplished more in a few weeks than every respected scholar and court magician had achieved in years. Rather than defend herself, Isla remained completely silent while the discussion unfolded around her. Lucian observed every face in the chamber before speaking with measured calm. "Has she demanded wealth?" he asked. The council members exchanged quiet glances. No one answered. "Has she requested influence over this kingdom?" Again silence filled the room. "Has she acted with anything except compassion toward every person she has met?" One by one, even the strongest critics lowered their eyes. Lucian offered no further argument because none was necessary. After the meeting ended, Isla thanked him for his confidence, but he gently shook his head. "I did not defend you because of gratitude," he said. "I defended the truth." Those simple words stayed with Isla throughout the day. She had spent much of her life believing kindness expected nothing in return. Hearing someone recognize it without being asked felt unexpectedly comforting. The following morning, heavy rain settled over the kingdom, forcing many villagers to seek shelter inside the castle while nearby roads became difficult to travel. Isla immediately joined the palace staff, preparing warm meals, organizing blankets, and comforting frightened children whose families had been delayed by the weather. She treated tired travelers with the same gentle attention she had once given neighbors in her small village. She never asked who carried titles and who did not. To her, every person deserved to feel safe. Lucian quietly watched from a nearby hallway. No audience surrounded Isla. No royal ceremony celebrated her actions. She simply noticed what people needed before they spoke, and offered help without expecting recognition. An elderly woman struggling to carry supplies smiled through grateful tears. After Isla walked beside her across the long corridor, a nervous little boy who had become separated from his parents slowly relaxed when Isla knelt beside him and told him stories about brave birds always finding their way home after storms. Those ordinary moments revealed a strength unlike anything Lucian had ever witnessed on a battlefield or inside a council chamber. It was gentle, patient, and remarkably steady. Later that evening the rain finally ended, leaving the castle gardens washed clean beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars. Lucian and Isla walked together in peaceful silence until they reached the old oak tree they had supported weeks earlier. Fresh green leaves had already begun spreading across its once bent branches. Isla smiled as she rested her hand lightly against the sturdy trunk. "It never needed someone to become its strength," she said softly. "It only needed enough care to remember its own." Lucian looked at the thriving tree before turning toward her. At that exact moment, warmth surged through his chest with greater clarity than ever before. The familiar voice of his wolf no longer sounded distant or hidden beneath layers of silence. It spoke with quiet certainty that filled him with unexpected peace. "She is not changing you," the wolf whispered. "She is helping you become the man you were always meant to be." For the first time, Lucian did not question the voice. Instead, he closed his eyes, accepted its words without fear, and realized that the greatest miracle Isla had brought into his life was not magical healing at all. She had reminded him that true power was never measured by how much control a person possessed, but by how much kindness they were willing to protect. Several peaceful weeks passed before the kingdom faced its first true test since hope had quietly returned to the castle. A severe drought began spreading across neighboring villages, leaving streams lower than anyone could remember and fields struggling beneath the relentless summer sun. Farmers arrived at the palace seeking guidance, not because they expected miracles, but because they trusted the king to stand beside them during difficult seasons. Lucian immediately postponed several ceremonial gatherings and chose to spend his days traveling through the countryside with his advisors, listening to families describe their concerns firsthand. Isla accompanied the royal delegation, offering practical healing to exhausted workers, teaching families how to preserve medicinal herbs during dry weather, and reminding frightened children that every difficult season eventually gave way to another harvest. She never promised outcomes she could not control. Instead, she gave people something far more valuable. She gave them confidence that they would not face hardship alone. As the days unfolded, Lucian noticed something remarkable. Every village they visited welcomed Isla with genuine affection, not because of extraordinary magic, but because she remembered names, listened patiently, and treated every person with equal dignity. Watching her quietly transformed his understanding of leadership. He realized that a crown could inspire respect, but only compassion could inspire trust. One afternoon, while standing upon a gentle hillside overlooking acres of thirsty farmland, Lucian felt the familiar warmth spread through his chest once again. This time the sensation no longer startled him. It felt as natural as drawing his next breath. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, and the voice of his wolf returned with greater clarity than ever before. It no longer sounded distant or trapped behind invisible walls. It stood beside him in peaceful certainty. "Look beyond what you can command," the wolf said softly. "See what she sees." Lucian opened his eyes and watched Isla kneeling beside a young apple tree, whose leaves had begun to droop beneath the heat. Instead of attempting to restore it with powerful magic, she carefully loosened the hardened soil surrounding its roots before gently watering it with the little fresh water they had available. "You are helping only one tree," Lucian observed as he approached. Isla smiled without looking up. "Every healthy orchard begins with one living tree. Hope grows the same way." Those words settled deeply within him. For years he had measured success by solving every problem alone. Isla measured success by helping others discover their own strength. As evening arrived, dark clouds slowly gathered above the distant mountains. A cool breeze swept across the valley, carrying the welcome scent of approaching rain. Villagers lifted hopeful eyes toward the sky while children laughed as the first gentle drops finally reached the dry earth. Lucian stood quietly beside Isla, feeling the refreshing rain upon his face. At that very moment, an extraordinary calm filled his entire being. The barrier separating him from his wolf simply dissolved without struggle. He no longer sensed two separate spirits sharing one life. Instead, he felt complete, as though a forgotten part of himself had finally returned home. The wolf spoke once more, not as a stranger hidden within the silence, but as the truest voice of his own heart. "She is your gifted mate." This time Lucian heard every word with perfect clarity. He slowly turned toward Isla, who remained peacefully watching the rain nourish the waiting fields. She had no idea what his wolf had just revealed. A quiet smile touched Lucian's face, but he chose not to speak the sacred words aloud. If destiny had truly brought Isla into his life, he wanted her heart to choose freely, never because of prophecy, ancient magic, or the voice of a wolf. For the first time since the curse began, he understood that love, like healing, could never be commanded. It could only be received as a gift willingly shared between two hearts that had both learned how to trust again. Autumn arrived quietly, covering the kingdom with shades of gold and crimson, while the first cool breeze carried the scent of falling leaves through the castle gardens. The harvest proved stronger than anyone had expected after the difficult summer, and people throughout the villages credited both the king's steady leadership and the healer whose gentle wisdom had restored hope long before the fields recovered. Yet despite the peace surrounding the kingdom, Lucian carried a new question inside his heart every day. He had heard his wolf speak with absolute certainty, but he refused to allow destiny alone to decide another person's future. He wanted Isla to know the man before she ever accepted the Alpha. Their mornings continued much as they always had, walking through the gardens before sunrise while the world remained quiet enough to hear birds greeting the new day. They spoke about ordinary things more often than extraordinary ones. Isla shared stories from the small communities where she had grown up, remembering neighbors who always found reasons to celebrate even during difficult seasons. Lucian spoke about his childhood before the curse, recalling the lessons his parents had taught him about serving the kingdom with humility instead of pride. Every conversation revealed another part of themselves that titles had hidden for years. One afternoon, Lucian invited Isla to accompany him to the royal observatory overlooking the entire valley. It had become one of his favorite places because the view reminded him how every river, forest, village, and mountain belonged to the same living kingdom. As they watched the afternoon sunlight stretch across the distant hills, Lucian finally broke the thoughtful silence between them. "May I ask you something that has nothing to do with healing?" Isla smiled warmly. "Those are usually the most important questions." Lucian rested his hands upon the old stone railing before looking toward the horizon. "You have spent weeks helping everyone around you. You have listened to strangers, comforted families, encouraged children, and reminded me how to become someone I thought I had lost. But I realize I have never asked what your own heart truly desires." Isla remained quiet for a moment, surprised not by the question itself, but by the sincerity behind it. "Peace," she answered softly. "Not the kind that comes from silence. The kind that comes from knowing people feel safe enough to be themselves. I have always believed the greatest gift anyone can offer another person is a place where they no longer have to pretend they are unworthy." Lucian slowly nodded as though every word settled exactly where it belonged. "Then I hope this kingdom becomes that place," he said. "Not because I rule it, but because people like you have shown us how to build it." Isla looked at him with quiet admiration. Months earlier she had met a king who believed strength meant carrying every burden alone. The man standing beside her now understood that true leadership invited others to share both responsibility and hope. As the sun gradually disappeared beyond the mountains, the familiar warmth rose gently inside Lucian once more. His wolf spoke with calm confidence instead of urgency. "Now she sees you." Lucian smiled but chose to remain silent. There was no need to rush what was unfolding naturally between them. Before they returned to the castle, he turned toward Isla with complete honesty. "There is something important I may tell you one day," he said. "But when I finally speak those words, I want you to know they come from my own heart before they come from destiny." Isla met his silver eyes and felt an unexpected sense of peace settle within her own heart. She did not know exactly what the future would bring, yet she understood one truth with absolute clarity. The greatest miracle she had witnessed inside the kingdom had never been the awakening of a cursed wolf. It had been watching a lonely man discover that love, trust, and compassion were choices freely made, and those choices possessed the power to heal even the oldest wounds. Winter arrived with quiet grace, dusting the castle towers and surrounding forests with a blanket of white while warm lights glowed from every window across the kingdom. Months had passed since Isla first entered the palace as an unknown healer, and the change within both the king and his people had become impossible to ignore. Merchants spoke of renewed confidence, families gathered more often in the village squares, and travelers remarked that the kingdom felt warmer than any place they had visited, even during the coldest season. Yet one final shadow remained. During the annual gathering of the royal houses, representatives from every noble family assembled inside the great hall to discuss the future of the kingdom. Among the many topics presented, one question quietly surfaced again. What place should an ordinary healer hold beside the Alpha King? Some nobles believed tradition required Lucian to choose a royal mate from one of the ancient bloodlines. Others respectfully acknowledged Isla's wisdom, but wondered whether someone without noble ancestry could truly stand beside the ruler of the kingdom. Throughout the discussion, Isla remained calm. She did not interrupt, defend herself, or attempt to earn approval through impressive words. She simply listened with the same patience she had shown every person she had ever helped. When the room finally fell silent, Lucian slowly rose from his seat. His voice carried the same quiet confidence that had always made others listen. But there was something new beneath it. There was peace. Many years ago, he began, I believed leadership meant preserving traditions exactly as they had always been. I now understand that traditions only remain worthy when they continue serving truth rather than fear. Every eye in the hall remained fixed upon him. This kingdom was never healed by titles. It was healed by compassion. It was never restored by status. It was restored by kindness freely given. If we teach future generations that character matters less than ancestry, then we will lose far more than any crown could ever protect. No one answered immediately because no one could deny what they themselves had witnessed over the past months. They had watched Isla care for nobles and servants without distinction. They had seen the king become more approachable, more compassionate, and stronger than he had ever been before. One by one, members of the council slowly nodded in agreement. The oldest elder stood first and offered a respectful bow toward Isla. Perhaps, he said gently, the greatest honor our traditions can receive is allowing wisdom to improve them. The tension that had quietly lingered throughout the hall simply disappeared. That evening, after the gathering had ended, Lucian and Isla walked together through the snow-covered gardens beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars. They stopped beside the same ancient oak tree that had once struggled to stand after the storm. It now rose tall and healthy, its branches reaching confidently toward the winter sky. Lucian looked at Isla with complete honesty, no longer speaking as a king, addressing his royal healer, but as one heart speaking to another. There was a time when I believed the curse had taken everything from me, he said softly. Now I understand it also led me to the person who taught me how to live without fear. Isla felt warmth spread through her heart as she met his silver eyes. Before either of them spoke again, a peaceful light seemed to settle through the quiet garden. Lucian felt his wolf fully present within him, no longer hidden behind silence or sorrow. There was no struggle, no overwhelming surge of magic, only a profound sense of wholeness. The ancient curse had quietly dissolved, not through force, but through forgiveness, trust, compassion, and the courage to accept love freely given. Lucian smiled gently before speaking the words his heart had carried for so long. My gifted mate. This time the words came not from the wolf alone, but from the man who had finally become whole. Several years passed, and the story that once began with uncertainty slowly became one of the most treasured legends in the kingdom. Travelers who crossed the mountain roads no longer spoke first about the power of the Alpha King, or the mystery of an ancient curse. Instead, they spoke about a kingdom where people were greeted with kindness before judgment, where leaders listened before giving orders, and where healing had become part of everyday life instead of something reserved only for times of hardship. At the center of that transformation stood Lucian Ashford and Isla Bennett, not as distant figures placed upon impossible pedestals, but as two people who had learned that lasting change always began with ordinary acts of compassion repeated day after day. Together they established healing houses throughout the kingdom, welcoming anyone in need regardless of status, family name, or wealth. Experienced healers trained young apprentices not only to understand herbs and healing magic, but also to practice patience, empathy, and careful listening. Isla often reminded every student that the strongest medicine could never replace the comfort of making another person feel seen and valued. Her words gradually became one of the guiding principles, carried from village to village, shaping an entire generation of healers who believed that caring for the heart was just as important as caring for the body. Lucian guided the kingdom with the same wisdom he had discovered during those quiet walks through the palace gardens years before. He continued visiting towns without elaborate ceremonies, choosing conversations over speeches and genuine understanding over appearances. Farmers, merchants, craftsmen, teachers, and children all knew they could speak honestly when the king arrived because he had learned that leadership was not measured by how loudly a ruler commanded but by how faithfully he served. The royal council also changed with time. Noble families began selecting advisors based upon integrity and wisdom instead of ancestry alone, remembering the lesson that had forever altered the future of the kingdom. Traditions remained respected, but they were no longer protected simply because they were old. They were preserved because they continued to encourage justice, compassion, and hope. One peaceful spring morning, Lucian and Isla returned to the ancient oak tree that had quietly accompanied every stage of their journey. It now stretched high above them with strong branches filled with bright green leaves, offering shade to anyone who rested beneath it. Children often gathered there to hear stories told by their grandparents, many of whom remembered the difficult years before hope had returned. As Lucian looked toward the thriving kingdom beyond the castle walls, he smiled gently. "Do you remember when you told me that roots become stronger when they are supported instead of forced?" he asked. Isla laughed softly. "I remember wondering whether you believed me." Lucian reached for her hand with quiet gratitude. "I believed you long before I believed myself." At that moment, the peaceful presence of his wolf settled warmly within his heart, no longer needing words because complete trust had replaced every fear that once filled the silence. Isla felt the same quiet certainty. The greatest gift destiny had ever given them was not simply finding one another. It was becoming the kind of people who could protect the light they had discovered together and share it with everyone around them. Long after their own story became part of the kingdom's history, people continued telling future generations that true strength never demanded fear, real love never removed another person's freedom, and the deepest healing always began when someone chose kindness, even when the world expected something else. And so the kingdom flourished, not because one curse had finally ended, but because two hearts had shown an entire generation that compassion, humility, and hope would always remain the greatest powers anyone could ever possess.